In July 1853, 4 American warships entered the waters near Edo, the political capital of Japan. 2 of them were steam-powered. To Japanese observers, the black smoke rising above the ships made them look almost unnatural. Their commander, Commodore Matthew Perry, carried a letter from the President of the United States asking for access to Japanese ports. But the real message came from the guns. Perry refused to sail to the one port where foreign contacts were normally controlled. He demanded that senior officials receive his letter near Edo itself. Then he left, and he promised to return with a larger fleet. Japan had spent more than 2 centuries restricting foreign access. Across the sea, the Qing Empire had tried to resist Western demands and lost the Opium War to Britain. Chinese ports had been forced open. Foreign powers had gained privileges inside Chinese territory. Japanese leaders knew what that meant. If they simply refused Perry, they could be next. Yet 50 years later, Japan would not be a Western colony. It would have a modern army, an industrial economy, revised treaties with Western powers, colonies of its own, and a navy capable of destroying a Russian fleet. So how did a country that could not force 4 American ships to leave become strong enough to defend its sovereignty? The answer begins 3 centuries before Perry. In 1543, Portuguese traders reached Japan. They brought new commercial connections and firearms. 6 years later, the Jesuit Francis Xavier arrived, and Christianity began spreading among parts of the population and some regional lords. Japan at the time was divided by civil war. European merchants were useful because they brought trade, weapons, and access to wider Asian networks. Missionaries could be useful as intermediaries, but rulers also watched what European powers were doing elsewhere. Spain had conquered the Philippines. Portuguese influence was expanding through maritime Asia. In Japan, Christian communities could create loyalties that political leaders did not fully control. As the country was reunified, first under Oda Nobunaga, then Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and finally Tokugawa Ieyasu, foreign religion and foreign access became security questions. Christianity was increasingly suppressed. In 1614, the Tokugawa shogunate formally banned the religion. During the 1630s, overseas travel and European access were restricted further. The Portuguese were expelled in 1639. This period is often described by one word, sakoku, or closed country. But Japan was never completely sealed. Chinese merchants continued trading at Nagasaki. The Dutch were permitted to trade through the small artificial island of Dejima. Relations with Korea passed through Tsushima. The Ryukyu Kingdom remained connected to both Japan and China, while the Matsumai domain controlled trade with the Ainu in the north. The shogunate was not trying to pretend the outside world did not exist. It was trying to decide who could enter, where they could enter, and which Japanese authorities could profit from the contact. That distinction matters. Before we continue, my name is Noah. We built this channel for people who want the full story behind the moments when entire countries were forced to adapt or disappear. If that sounds like you, subscribe. It is free, and it helps us make better videos more than you might think. All right, back to Japan. For more than 2 centuries, Japan enjoyed relative internal peace. Cities expanded, commercial agriculture grew, merchants became wealthy, roads tied domains to Edo. Education and literacy spread among samurai and substantial parts of the wider population. This was not an industrial society, but it was also not an empty medieval state waiting for the West to modernize it. There was another advantage hidden inside the supposedly closed system. Information kept entering. Japanese interpreters and scholars studied Dutch books on medicine, astronomy, geography, weapons, and natural science. This became known as Rangaku, or Dutch learning. And when Britain defeated Qing China in the First Opium War, Japanese officials could learn what had happened. Western warships were not a theoretical threat. They had already demonstrated what industrial naval power could do to one of East Asia's great empires. Japan's greatest protection was not that it knew nothing about the outside world. It was almost the opposite. The shogunate had restricted foreign contact while still preserving narrow channels through which information could arrive. Japan was protected by distance, but geography was not immunity. European empires had crossed much greater oceans to conquer territory. What controlled contact had given Japan was time. Perry's arrival showed that the time was running out. When he returned in 1854 with a larger squadron, the shogunate signed the Treaty of Kanagawa. Shimoda and Hakodate were open for American vessels to obtain supplies. Shipwrecked sailors were to be protected, and the United States could appoint a consul. It was not yet a full commercial treaty. That came in 1858. The Harris Treaty opened more ports and expanded trade, but on terms Japan could not consider equal. Foreigners received extraterritorial privileges, meaning they could be tried under their own consular systems rather than ordinary Japanese jurisdiction. Japan also lost important freedom over its tariffs. Other Western powers obtained similar agreements. Japan had avoided conquest. It had not avoided humiliation. And the treaties damaged something the Tokugawa shogunate could not easily repair. Its claim to be the authority capable of protecting the country. The foreign crisis split Japanese politics. Some officials argued that resistance without modern weapons would be suicidal. Others demanded that foreigners be expelled. Activists rallied around the slogan, "Sono Joy," revere the emperor, expel the barbarians. But the slogan collided with reality. The powerful Satsuma domain fought Britain in 1863 after a diplomatic dispute. British warships bombarded Kagoshima. Choshu fired on foreign shipping in the Shimonoseki Strait. The following year, forces from Britain, France, the Netherlands, and the United States attacked its coastal batteries. The lesson was difficult to ignore. Courage was not enough. The treaty crisis also damaged the shogunate from inside. The government had traditionally kept foreign policy under its own control. Now it was consulting powerful domains and facing criticism from the imperial court in Kyoto. That widened arguments over who actually had the authority to decide Japan's future. The opening of trade also disrupted prices in the currency. Foreign merchants were visible in new treaty ports, while political violence increased around them. A senior shogunate official who had pushed through the commercial treaties and cracked down on opponents was assassinated outside Edo Castle in 1860. And there was another reason Japan still had room to maneuver. The Western powers were not one coordinated empire waiting to divide the country. Britain, Russia, France, the Netherlands, and the United States competed with one another and had major commitments elsewhere. For many of them, commercial access and diplomatic privileges were cheaper than conquering and administering a populous archipelago. That competition gave Japan options. But relying on foreign rivalry was not a strategy. If Japan wanted lasting sovereignty, it still had to change the balance of power itself. The domains most associated with opposition to foreign pressure began buying foreign weapons, building modern forces, and learning from the countries they had wanted to expel. Perry had created the crisis. But foreign warships did not overthrow the Tokugawa shogunate. Japanese politics did. The question was no longer whether the old government could keep foreigners out. It was whether Japan could survive while keeping the old political system at all. Satsuma and Choshu eventually formed an alliance against the shogunate. In 1867, the last Tokugawa shogun returned governing authority to the emperor, but conflict continued. The following year, forces supporting a new imperial government defeated shogunate loyalists and began what became known as the Meiji Restoration. The word restoration makes the change sound conservative. In practice, it became a revolution from above. The men governing in the young Emperor Meiji's name did not simply replace the shogun with an emperor and continue as before. They dismantled much of the political structure that had existed for centuries. Feudal domains were abolished and replaced by prefectures controlled from the center. Former daimyo lost their territorial governments. Samurai privileges were gradually removed. A national conscription system created an army that no longer depended on the warrior class. A new land tax gave the central government a more predictable source of revenue. Schools expanded. Telegraph lines connected officials and markets. Railways began linking cities. Factories, arsenals, shipyards, banks, and modern ministries multiplied. Foreign specialists were hired. Japanese students were sent abroad, and the government studied its rivals with extraordinary intensity. The Iwakura mission left Japan in 1871 with senior statesmen, officials, and students. It traveled through the United States and Europe, attempting unsuccessfully to begin treaty revision while examining factories, governments, schools, armies, courts, and industries. Japan did not copy one Western country. It borrowed selectively. British influence was strong in the Navy. French and later German models shaped parts of the Army and law. American and European ideas influenced education, industry, agriculture, and business. The Constitution later drew heavily from continental European models, especially Prussia. The goal was not to become Western. The goal was to become strong enough that Western governments could no longer claim Japan was unfit for equal treatment. This is why treaty revision mattered as much as battleships. Western powers had justified extraterritoriality partly by arguing that Japanese law and courts did not meet their standards. So legal reform, diplomacy, and state building became weapons of sovereignty. In 1889, Japan promulgated a constitution. The Imperial Diet opened the following year. These institutions were limited, and the political system remained authoritarian by modern democratic standards. But internationally, Japan increasingly looked like the kind of centralized nation-state Western powers claimed to respect. Then the transformation moved beyond defense. 30 years earlier, Japan had looked at China and seen a warning of what Western imperialism could do. Now Qing China was looking at Japan's modern army and navy. In 1894, competition over Korea helped trigger the first Sino-Japanese War. Japanese forces won major victories on land and at sea. The Treaty of Shimonoseki in 1895 forced Qing China to recognize Korean independence, pay a large indemnity, and cede Taiwan and other territory to Japan. Japan had gone from being pressured by unequal treaties to imposing unequal power on its neighbors. Even victory revealed the hierarchy of the imperial world. Russia, Germany, and France intervened and forced Japan to return the Liaodong Peninsula. Japan had defeated China. It still had to listen when three larger powers said no. But another diplomatic breakthrough had already begun. In 1894, Britain agreed to a new commercial treaty with Japan. When the revised system took effect in 1899, British extraterritorial jurisdiction in Japan ended, and similar revisions followed with other powers. Japan was recovering legal sovereignty, not because the West had suddenly abandoned imperialism, but because Japanese reforms and changing diplomatic interests made unequal treatment harder to defend and less useful to maintain. Full tariff autonomy would take longer. Meanwhile, Japan's own imperial expansion accelerated. The Meiji state had formally incorporated Hokkaido and pursued settlement and assimilation policies that dispossessed and marginalized the indigenous Ainu. The Ryukyu kingdom was abolished and incorporated as Okinawa Prefecture in 1879. After the war with China, Taiwan became a Japanese colony. Korea increasingly became the center of rivalry with Russia. In 1902, Britain and Japan signed an alliance that mattered enormously. Half a century after Perry's Black Ships, a major European empire was no longer treating Japan simply as a state to be open. It was treating Japan as a strategic partner. 2 years later, Japan went to war with Russia. The conflict was fought largely over competing interests in Korea and Manchuria. Japanese forces attacked Port Arthur, fought an enormous and costly land campaign, and in 1905 faced the Russian Baltic Fleet, which had sailed halfway around the world to reach East Asia. At the Battle of Tsushima, the Japanese Navy destroyed much of it. The psychological effect traveled far beyond Japan. An Asian state had defeated a major European empire in modern industrial war. But even this victory had limits. Japan was financially exhausted. Russia was weakened by war and domestic revolution, but it had not been conquered. The Treaty of Portsmouth recognized Japan's dominant position in Korea, transferred important Russian rights in southern Manchuria, and gave Japan the southern half of Sakhalin. Russia paid no no indemnity, disappointing many Japanese who believed battlefield victory should have produced more. So Tsushima was not the moment Japan magically escaped colonization. By 1905, that escape had already been achieved. The battle was evidence of how completely the balance had changed. Japan avoided incorporation into a Western empire because no single factor decided its fate. Geography created distance, not safety. Tokugawa restrictions reduced foreign political penetration, while controlled trade and scholarship kept information flowing. The Opium War showed Japanese leaders what failure could look like. Perry forced the country into unequal relations, but he also accelerated a domestic political crisis. The Meiji leadership then used an existing foundation of commerce, literacy, administration, and social organization to centralize the state at extraordinary speed. Conscription made military power national. Tax reform paid for it. Education and overseas study supplied expertise. Industry and infrastructure made reforms sustainable. Diplomacy exploited competition among the foreign powers. And treaty revision converted growing strength into formal recognition. But there is a final contradiction. Japan did not simply defeat imperialism. It learned how the imperial system worked. Hokkaido was colonized through Japanese settlement and Ainu dispossession. Ryukyu was incorporated. Taiwan became a colony. Korea became a Japanese protectorate in 1905 and was formally annexed 5 years later. Japan escaped the imperial order as a potential Western colony by entering that order as an imperial power itself. So the answer was never that Japan successfully hid from the world. Isolation bought time. Information revealed the danger. Political revolution made radical reform possible. Industry and military power made sovereignty defensible. Diplomacy made that sovereignty increasingly recognized. And the cost of that success was that Japan began using many of the same methods of empire it had once feared. The country was not untouched by imperialism. It survived by adapting to the imperial age faster than almost anyone expected.